Awesome. Yeah, welcome everyone. Really excited for our chat today on Think You're Ready to Sign Your First Big Logo. And I'm going to put a message in the chat here. We can use this throughout. There's a chat button for this session. There's a Q&A feature as well, where you can either use a text-based question, which is basically, enter it into the chat and we'll be able to see what questions are going on. Or the video Q&A tab is really a hand raise where you say, I have a question, I want to come up on stage and ask directly. This is all part of our Prepare for VC Startup Oasis programming, really here to support founders at every stage of their startup journey, and excited to have experts like Matt from Duplocloud ready to join us and help all the entrepreneurs in our network learn from his expertise in cloud security space, and really excited to share his perspectives with all of you today. He's going to be diving into a presentation and workshop. Be here to monitor the chat, help with any questions along the way, and it's going to be about an hour long event, and then we also have some networking rooms set up afterwards for anybody that wants to continue the conversation. But yeah, Matt, if you want to share your screen at the bottom, and yeah, again, really excited to have you here, and I know I've learned a lot from our conversations, and I'm sure all of our attendees and community here will as well. So yeah, excited we can see your screen and excited to hand it over.
Okay, excellent. Just going to organize my room here. Thanks for inviting me to participate. Cool. As far as the schedule, just so you know, I do have a fairly hard meeting at 2. So, but I'm not sure about the amount of content, so we may finish a little early if we want to have more interactive.
Works great.
Okay, so first off, we set this up just to give a sense. Like, I'm fairly new to the Prepare for VC community. I think it was Steve that had pulled me into an event where there was a software developer out of Argentina, and it just seemed like a real good group where you're kind of everybody's helping each other, and it's all about go to market, how to get that startup to the point where they're seeing revenue. And I shared with Steve the story that I'd had where I'd helped a client at a kind of a pivotal, kind of scary moment before they were about to get their first contract with a big Fortune 20 company, and I thought it would be helpful for the group, and it's just a way to kind of become more a part of the community and help out. So I guess just initial introductions, who I am. My name again is Matt Warren. I work at Duplocloud as an account engineer, so I'm customer facing. And what we do is we help people build infrastructure in a secure way on all 3 of the major cloud providers. Me as a person, grew up in upstate New York, now living in Connecticut, have an engineering degree from Virginia Tech. Out of college, I worked with network analyzers for the big telecom providers, and then more recently was at a custom software developer named Skiplist in Ohio. And then when our family moved to Connecticut, I was recruited to join Duplocloud and help them scale. And again, we're like a Devsecops as a service company. So here's the story. Let me just jump in. So it was almost this time last year. So it was the Tuesday following Memorial Day, and an event popped up on my calendar. It was a startup asking for time to meet with our company. And they were out of London, so it's 7:30 their time on a Tuesday. And they had been introduced to us through Amazon Web Services. So they have this thing called a marketplace, and Duplocloud is listed as a partner. And they saw that we might be able to help them. And so we hopped on a Zoom. And, they had, I think it was the CEO, the CTO, maybe an engineer. And then based on the conversation, I quickly brought an engineer on the call with me as well. And, we start off typical call. We're just trying to get a sense of what their tech stack is, what their application, and what the situation, what's the current state and what's the problem, where they desired state. And this is Tuesday afternoon. They had a meeting with a CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer for a Fortune 20 prospect, on Friday. And they were freaking out because they'd been sent what they thought was just kind of like a procedural, just getting the contract in place. But they were given this Infosec questionnaire, and it had a bunch of questions about the security of their application. And they didn't have good answers. And so they wanted to have good answers before Friday. So let's take a moment and just go back in time 5 months. What happened that led up to this point where they're kind of in a crisis mode on a Tuesday afternoon. So typical early stage startup, they'd had some success. So their founder had a great idea to solve a pretty big problem for consumer packaged goods. And they had a way that they could bring in a lot of new customers. It used some modern technology and some, scientifically proven processes to bring in these people. And so they got this team together. He found a good engineer that could serve as the CTO. And they also contracted some developers offshore, and they got to work. They started building the application. They're building towards that MVP, the minimum viable product. And the MVP was good enough that when they did a pitch, they got the approval of some investors. They got some cash, and they spent the cash on marketing. So they got their website looking shipshape, and they also made a promotional video that was outstanding. And those two things, coupled with some connections that the investors had, and they were getting meetings at a few of these big consumer packaged goods companies. Like, these are Fortune 20 companies, huge. And they're meeting with decision makers, and everybody's liking the idea and what they've got, and it's looking good. To the point where the week before Memorial Day, they had a meeting, and the key decision makers all gave them the thumbs up. They agreed on financial terms. It looked like it was a go. And they get this email, and they go down this roller coaster because the email looks great, looks procedural. This contract is almost signed. And then there's this attachment, which is the Infosec questionnaire, and a meeting with the CISO the following Friday. And they start looking in, they're like, okay, let's take a look. What's in here? And so the Infosec questionnaire is, some legal speak, but most of it is focused on making sure that any partner is going to treat information that's sensitive in a highly secure way. So there's different rules. There's different metrics. There's points of contact. There's all these different processes of how you keep information secure, but also if some breach happens, you've got to be watching the application, the performance, monitoring things, and then quickly responding to remediate a vulnerability, and also alerting this company of the problem that happened. So they didn't have good answers to a lot of these requirements. And so they start kind of tearing their hair out. And so, the questions that they're left with in that situation is, okay, what modifications do we make? They correctly built an MVP. So they didn't, think about, okay, what if this scales? What if it hits a home run and we've got tons of people using it? How are we going to maintain the viability of the app and the security? And so they're looking at what tasks need to be done to satisfy this Infosec questionnaire. And then they start thinking about who can help. because it's getting weedy and it doesn't seem like they're going to be able to figure this out on their own. So they come on up with a list. I think I'll talk about that later. But well, okay, so some of the issues are for typical applications. If you're starting it off, you want to have a username and password. But now all of a sudden you're holding data and you need to maintain that data with a high level of security. And so there's different approaches. You can use multi-factor authentication, or you can use federated access. So this is an example of how Duplocloud's portal works, where people use either their Gmail or their Microsoft Outlook to access our system, so that if an employee leaves the company, they no longer have a viable email, so they can't get in. So that's one way to maintain security. And then there's also this, which is a little bit of a meme, but when you're a startup, sometimes you don't have traffic, so you get used to doing things that aren't following the best practices. So you need to have dev, staging, and production environments, and they should all be isolated. So this is another example of something that if you're building an MVP, it may not feel as important, but once you're going prime time, you need to have an enterprise grade process. The other thing that starts to happen, and this is why the CTO and the CEO were kind of freaking out, is that even though it was a fairly simple application, for every object that exists in the application, there may be 10, 15, 20 different tasks that need to be done from a DevOps standpoint to secure that environment. And so the complexity gets really complicated. It gets big fast. And then when it comes to monitoring an application, this is where you're tracking how the application is performing, and you're kind of looking for anomalies. If bad actors are trying to make repeated failed attempts to log in to some sensitive area, then monitoring and alerts will kind of notify you of that. So all this complexity, I guess what I wanted to show is that once you may not be thinking about security, but once you do, you're opening a door, and when you look in, it can get scary because there's just so much to do. In fact, quite often it could take 2 engineers 6 months to meet all these security controls of a standard such as NIST or PCI DSS. So who can you go to for help? And that was the question that this prospect was asking over Memorial Day weekend when they were trying to figure out how to save their deal. They were in the midst of kind of DIY, do it yourself, and they were looking at resources that are available through the cloud providers. And they do provide a ton of information. And I mentioned PCI DSS standard a couple minutes ago. And that, for example, they have like a 3,400 page document that talks about PCI compliance using AWS. So there's definitely resources, but there's almost maybe too much information. It's just such a vast area that it can be overwhelming. The other thing you can do, there's a whole new set of people or companies out there that provide compliance monitoring. And so what these guys do is they'll kind of like put agents in your solution and just validate that you've done what you said you're going to do. So earlier we talked about multi-factor authentication. That's where all your employees are going to use MFA to get into any resources of your company, and they'll just be validating that. So it's a way to kind of gather evidence. So these companies can validate that you've done things, but they're not actually doing any of the work. It's up to you. The third option is there's a bunch of companies that are called Devsecops Firms. So these are consulting groups, and they go from huge companies like PwC or Slalom. There's also smaller groups such as, I'll we'll use Duplocloud as a good example. We're fairly small, but we're taking a different approach where we use an automation platform. So we kind of straddle that. We're not necessarily not necessarily consulting. We can do that white glove service where it's like managed, where we'll do everything. But you can also use the automation as a self-service, and you'll be able to do your own work on your own. And then the other two companies that can help in some of this cleaning up your security posture are pen test firms as well as auditors. And so pen test is penetration testing. This is basically like hired good hackers. Like it's a group of people, and they'll try to pound on your application to try to find a way in, and then they'll give you a report that shows where you have vulnerabilities. And that can range. Like, so for example, Duplocloud offers, for all our clients, we do a quarterly pen test using an open source tool for free. But you could hire firms such as Stratum Security is a good one stateside. A friend of mine is a founder of Stratum Security, and they're out of Maryland. And then there's a group called Financial Strides that I usually partner with in Europe, and they're like a fintech specialist. And then there's Prescient, which is another partner of ours. But there's a whole community of pen testers that can help you with that. And then the auditors, there's too many to mention, but there's just a whole group of people that can go in there and verify that you are meeting the security compliance that you say that you are. So we have a bunch of choices. This particular prospect on Memorial Day weekend, when they're stressing about their first deal, they're in AWS, and they're kind of looking through that 3,400 page document on PCI, and they come across, first off, this is the security model. AWS is highly secure cloud provider, same as GCP and Azure, but they will tell you that they're only going to secure the security of the cloud, and you're responsible as a person that's writing code for an application. You're responsible for the security in the cloud. There's something called AWS Inspector. This is something that will kind of look through your code, either on like a repository such as GitHub or ECR, and they'll look for vulnerabilities or places in your code where you're listing security keys or passcodes that you shouldn't be. So again, Duplocloud came up when they were looking for help. And what did we do? We hopped on that Zoom call. We kind of went through what we could offer as far as our automation. We discussed that high level application, like what they had. And then what we did is we took them through a process where we rebuilt using the automation, things that had taken them 6 months to do. In a matter of those 2 or 3 days, we were able to rebuild the application using VPCs with private subnets. So you can kind of protect the more sensitive data behind a firewall. And then installing some of the databases and the container, like there's pointers to these different containers of either the production or the staging or the dev version of code. And so we connected all those, and we protect them with things like load balancers. So I don't know if people have heard of this, but there's these things called Ddos attacks. And this is where a hacker will just repeatedly send a request or a message to a server. And although the server knows that it's not eligible to, for that request, it overwhelms the server with just the sheer volume. It's just noise. And so that can bring an application down. But if you put in load balancers and firewalls, then you'll protect your application and you won't be vulnerable to those kind of attacks. But the most significant thing that we did is we added some of the diagnostics. And these are like dashboards that are aggregating and gathering all this monitor data of how your application is performing. And these are very important and spelled out distinctly in the security control requirements. So we built these dashboards in a matter of 2 days, and then we even connected them with the CI/CD pipeline process, so that when the devs are working on a new feature, they push up the code and it gets deployed automatically, and it gets deployed in a secure fashion. So anytime any new service is added to the application, it's also added to the different dashboards. And throughout the whole process, these security controls are maintained. And you'll see something like IAM. This is Identity Access Management. And this is really important. It's like how many people have keys to get in and take a look at or change your code. And staging and dev, that can be relatively open, but production should be very tight. There should only be 1 or 2 people that have access to that. Duplocloud manages this, and actually we make it much more simple. And you don't have to give access to the raw control panel, because Duplocloud can give temporary access to anybody that needs to do something, but then revoke that access after about an hour so they can get their work done. So prior to, coming into Duplocloud, these people, they were working and getting things accomplished and getting their application, to do its job, but they were having to struggle with the complexity of dealing with 10, 15 different tools to get all the DevOps and security done. So it ends up meaning it takes longer. Like just development just takes longer, and without the automation. And if it takes longer, sometimes you're in a rush, you either cut corners or you make mistakes. DevOps and security are not an area that you want or need creativity. It's just really following the best practices. What happens in small organizations is there may be one person like that CTO that gets drawn upon for a bunch of small tasks that really aren't the best use of their time. And so that's why partnering with someone that can help you with the DevOps and the security is really a good decision, because you want to free up that CTO to be thinking about how to differentiate your product and what features are important to your customers. So Duplocloud comes in there, we save the day. We kind of ride in on the white horse. Within like 3-4 days, we rebuilt their application in a more secure posture. And the deliverable is this. So what we did is basically we drew up a white paper that kind of defined all the different DevOps controls and security controls that were implemented. And it was an artifact that the client was able to give to the CISO of this company and win the contract. So they got the deal, and then we had maybe 80% of the work done in the first 3 days, and then over the next 2 weeks we cleaned up the rest. And then we have this partnership where we're able to help them, and so now they retain Duplocloud as our the Devsecops partner. So that's some of it. And what I was hoping to do is now, if there is Q&A, I was going to go into a little bit more detail about what's involved in an Infosec questionnaire. But maybe I'll just pause and just see if there's any thoughts.
Sure. Yeah. No, I really enjoy the story, the presentation. And yeah, definitely some time if anybody has questions in the chat they want to enter there. Just to kick off, really wanted to ask, is there a particular type of tech company or vertical? Obviously, B2B makes a lot of sense with these big corporate logos, but specific industries or verticals this is more applicable to, or it's pretty broad spectrum?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think we've seen a lot of traction with B2B, but also fintech and health tech companies. And I think that's because both of those are regulated. So in order to be in those spaces, you have to meet certain security compliance, like such as HIPAA for health tech, and then PCI DSS for anything financial is important. Also, ISO 27001 is another big one for the financial vertical market.
And, if we're staying up to date, say, I mean, I know this talks about finding your first big logo, but say you're on to your second big logo, is using Duplocloud the same for the next big customer?
Yeah, I mean, if your application is compliant, then you'll be able to just send over that same white paper artifact to the next client. And you can spin up new environments and still kind of fit within that compliance if the client prefers that. But also based on setting up certain infrastructure rules, and maybe I can get into a little bit more detail here.
Sure.
See if I find this. There's a second. Let me just pull up this for a second. There's another presentation I think has a document that might be helpful. Okay, can you see that screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the key here is there's a couple different terms, but when I talked earlier about the VPCs, the virtual private cloud, and then there's the private net subnets and the public subnets. You see these dashed lines?
Yep.
Right. So this kind of it's like a tenant, and that's like you can create different tenants within your infrastructure that provide a certain sense of isolation, right? So that everything within that space is kind of secure. And so if you have a new client and it requires its own special handling, then you could create a new subnet for that new client data. But typically, if you build the application correctly, multiple clients can use the same VPC. So it's kind of a case-by-case basis. But Duplocloud has the automation to be able to spin these up with kind of almost effortlessly.
Oh, perfect.
The other thing to note here, I mean, in this case, the story that I tell, they worked on this application for 6 months, and then we came in and kind of basically rebuilt the thing over a period of 3 days. But it does, like, we found that 70% of the security controls are determined at the point of provisioning the infrastructure. So it's good to kind of follow these best practices and think about security at the beginning, because then you don't have to redo it.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then, so, I mean, you can come in any stage, but obviously, like, it's better if you come in sort of towards the beginning and not have to redo a lot of the security protocols that are in place.
I mean, I think there's still value in having a working application. Right. So sometimes I think you usually, Duplocloud does best when you're pretty close to having revenue, because if you're an early stage startup, you don't want to be burning cash, and having a partnership with someone like Duplocloud does cost money. So you want to make sure that you're seeing the value.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yep.
Cool. And then just from, is it pretty, from the other side, from the corporate perspective or the client perspective, these documents are pretty standard across the board, and what they're used to seeing on all of their all of the signups that they go with?
So the Infosec questionnaires can vary quite a bit. So, and I have access. So if people want to hit me up, I can, I'm open to share, a couple of examples of InfoSec questionnaires that are common. So like this story that I told, I have that InfoSec questionnaire from that company. And so if someone wants it, just hit me up either on LinkedIn or email and I can share it. But they do vary. Like this one was 11 pages, but some are 60 pages long. And it can be kind of redundant. That's why sometimes it's good to lean into it. In other words, if you're engaging with a prospect and you know that they're going to send you an InfoSec questionnaire, sometimes it's better to preempt it and send them a white paper that Duplocloud gives you, and so you don't have to go through that process of answering their format. And I have another partner that we're familiar with that has kind of automated a way to respond to some of those InfoSec questionnaires to make that easier too. So for like a B2B that's constantly bringing in new clients and each one of them asks for something, there are some methods to make that process easier.
Right.
And that's another reason to do the security compliance. So once you have that, it usually starts with SOC 2. So that's the first level, and that's fairly easy to get SOC 2 compliant. But then you can move towards NIST or ISO 27001, PCI DSS. These are certifications that once you have that, it in some ways reduces the need to do an InfoSec questionnaire, other than listing out some of the, maybe I should get into that a little bit more. So some of the things that this InfoSec questionnaire is asking for, it's asking for like a point of contact. Who's going to be responsible for security at your startup, right? So some of it's just procedural, deciding, okay, is it the CTO or do we want to, pick somebody else in the company that's going to handle all the security details. And it's not just making sure that the application continues to be secure, but it's like communicating with clients if you've had some sort of a breach, or even just a vulnerability, letting them know that there's a vulnerability, you've got the patch, you're implementing it, it should be done in 2 days or something. So there's that kind of procedural aspects of this that you need to kind of put in place. But what Duplocloud helps with most is the cloud infrastructure piece.
And so how often, say, we're talking typical tech startup that, is continuously making updates and improvements and additions to features and functionality. How often should they go back and adjust everything that's in, plugs into the InfoSec questionnaires?
That's a good question. So if you do it correctly, it's continuous, like you're continuously in security compliance. And that's the beauty of setting up some of these automation processes. So when I talked about, hang on a second. Right here. So with the CICD pipeline, once Duplocloud kind of connects your CI/CD pipeline, every time you have a developer push up new code, it's going to be deployed in a secure manner. So it's going to connect all those other, it's going to do those 10, 15 other tasks that connect that new service with the dashboard that keeps the alerts and monitors performance and things like that. So it's taking care of all those tasks so you're still compliant. And the automation is important because anytime you change something in your application, if you haven't created that automation, then you could be out of compliance. And nobody wants to deal with a company that's compliant, one day every 6 months. You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah. So, and what you want to do is you want to set up a situation where you can keep pushing code more frequently. So you want to make it easy for engineers to push new code. That's what it's all about these days.
So who do you want to get involved? Say, is it typically the CEO, the CTO, and dev team? Who's involved in like understanding everything that goes in and out of Duplocloud?
So you definitely need support from the founder, the CEO, but we mainly work with the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, or like a director or VP of engineering, that kind of person. Usually we'll have some interaction with the devs just so that they're comfortable. But once they realize that they can just push their code up to GitHub, like we don't care. We're agnostic as far as what people use for their development infrastructure. But we'll connect it so that, once they realize that they can do their work in the environment that, the SDK that they feel comfortable with, they usually give the thumbs up. And so it's really more about the CTO, and then just kind of like, I think it's in the decision-making process. And then once you switch to onboarding, that's when you realize how nice it is to have a partner, because what you end up with is you have, your engineers have a Slack channel where if they're curious about something like, geez, I don't know if I quite know how I want to deploy this. Do I want to use some third-party messaging service, or should I use the cloud provider's messaging service, and how will that affect the performance? Now, all of a sudden, you've got a Slack channel where you can pose that question to people that are Devsecops engineers that are supporting 60, 100 different companies. So we have the experience to give you a quick answer and make better decisions. You don't have to guess.
Right.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. I think the basic, though, to come back to it, is really it's just the goal of this was to get some awareness. I feel like what you want is a small early stage startup. Say they only have 3 or 4 people that are at the company. They've got a couple people that are devs, and the founder and a CTO. Keep moving, keep working on building your product and getting it looking great and proving out that it's going to be a hit. But when you get to the point where you're ready to go after that first opportunity and hit the prime time, just know that there's some work that you're going to have to do to get it from an MVP to enterprise grade, and you don't have to do it yourself. You know what I mean? Like, there's people out there that can help you, because it's going to get weedy quick. So that's kind of the essence of what I was hoping to do today.
Right. No, I think that's perfect. Yeah, no matter what stage you're in, it's always better to at least know what you need to know, rather than have them be sort of unknowns you're going to find out along the way. And if there's people and companies that can support you, like understanding what questions are going to be asked, and help figure out what pathway you need to take to be in the best position to sign your customers, get them excited about everything you're doing, and feel confident and in the trust and security you've built for your business, then that helps a lot.
Cool. Well, that's kind of all I had. So I realized it is kind of short, not the full hour. Apologize for racing through it.
No, I think that was great. So what we're going to do, we'll have, really appreciate everybody coming out to this. We'll have this recording too on our YouTube channel. Matt, I can share with you afterwards. And all the other attendees that came out as well. We do have some time in the rooms. You can click leave the stage, and there's a rooms tab for a little bit more, networking. Anybody can sit down at the table there. But really appreciate all the advice and support you gave today. And I know you have your contact info up here. How do you prefer to be connected with and reached out to for anybody that wants to follow up?
Yeah, I mean, so it's duplocloud.com is our website. So that's one way. My email is matt@duplocloud.net. And then you can reach out on LinkedIn as well. I think you could search Matt Warren, but Matthew Smith Warren is the specific handle.
Perfect. Yeah, really appreciate it. Yeah. And thanks again for everyone that came out. Again, this is part of the Prepare for VC series, where, you know, bringing experts like Matt on to help with different areas of your startup growth journey, and, you know, providing expertise, support to help you at every stage of your startup. So yeah, thanks again. I'm going to click, we can both click leave stage here and then go over to the rooms tab if anybody wants to continue network for a little bit. And